So now let's go into the investigators, and I appreciate that you're here today so that you can maybe shed some light on this. So how many investigators total are there?
Sure, I can handle that. Again, I'm Deputy Director of Investigations. And so above me is the Director of Investigations, and then myself and Ms. DeCastro are the attorney investigators in that unit, and then we have 3 investigators that we work with on cases.
So there's how many total of you in the investigations area?
So there's 5 total.
5.
We often pull assistance from other associate attorneys if we have a matter that we feel their area of expertise would be helpful on. We utilize their assistance in some matters.
Where are the attorneys pulled from?
The associate attorneys who work in some of the other areas of JCOPE.
In JCOPE, though. Got it. Okay. And can you just talk a little bit about the training? So Seth explained your training in terms of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct, which is incredibly extensive and very helpful. But how does that relate to the other investigators who are either working with you or above you?
Sure.
As it relates especially to sexual harassment.
Our investigators all had lengthy careers themselves in law enforcement in federal agencies. So they've all had training through their careers in federal law enforcement. When it comes to handling sexual harassment matters, typically with those matters, it's manageable enough for myself and Ms. DeCastro to always be present during those interviews and to be one of the members of the team on that. So we are directly supervising those kinds of cases. There's not been any direct training of those investigators in handling those matters.
Would that be something that you think perhaps would be helpful as more and more cases? I mean, it seems that when you started out, there were 3% of your cases were sexual harassment, but over the years, that number is growing. And I think that as our culture continues to move towards a speak up and shed light on what's going on, then more people, hopefully, it's my hope at least, and that's one of the reasons that we're here today, that more people will come forward. And so if JCOPE is this entity that's going to be handling sexual harassment cases as one of their portfolios, I think it would probably be very helpful to have everyone trained in sexual harassment. And also, perhaps, I mean, to have trauma-informed training, because I think when you're dealing with someone who's been traumatized or victimized, there's a specific type of way, as you know, to deal with that person. And that can affect the experience that someone has with your entity.
Definitely.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree.
So what would that look like? I mean, how can we make sure that that happens? As you know, JCOPE is the entity that we're dealing with right now. So how do we make sure that the people inside of JCOPE have the skills that they need to handle the cases coming before them, so that people feel like they have been taken care of in the proper way?
Okay. Certainly, I agree. I mean, in the last year, we've received significantly more cases of this type than we had in years before. And so we've definitely been taking a look at this and to look at how we can handle these matters internally and the best way to approach them as a whole. In terms of training, I mean, we can do internal training from my own background and experience in gathering information to help do that, and from we can also seek outside training. Similar to the way different areas like...
What would outside training look like, do you think?
Well, there are different entities and agencies that usually are a compilation of therapists, people involved in, well, in my case, it was mostly law enforcement and trying to do investigations and gather information. So it could be a group, a collective group of people with multidisciplinary backgrounds.
Okay. So I appreciate that. I want to just also shed some light as to why I'm asking this question, because I've looked extensively into the certain types of cases that you handle. And so you have a limited staff, I understand, you have a limited budget, and your primary focus, at least from the outside looking in, is lobbying. And so my ultimate question is JCOPE really capable of handling sexual harassment cases? Are you the proper and correct entity to be handling these cases, or would you recommend that these cases go to a different entity?
I'll speak for myself.
Please.
As I said, I don't have my 12 commissioners lined up behind me at this point, so
That's okay.
I'll speak for myself. I think we are a correct venue for handling matters that involve the public officers law. And if that's, it's the way the law is written now. And I think that is what, there's a history of going back to the State Ethics Commission, one of our predecessors, the Public Integrity, the Commission on Public Integrity, going back to, I mean, we're talking about going back to 1987. To the extent the
I thought you were
conduct,
referring to a different commission.
I'm sorry?
I thought you were referring to a different commission.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's but as I said, in terms of the way the law is written now, we cannot give, perhaps, the full relief that a victim of sexual harassment may be entitled to.
So
There is a limit.
how would you recommend to us to be able to do that in the law? What do we as a body need to do to make sure that that happens?
I mean, there are two choices. If you ask a lawyer a question, you're not going to get a one answer.
I'm a lawyer, so I
I know,
understand.
I know that. You could certainly give the authority to JCOPE to conduct inquest into lost wages, order reinstatement, and make it look like what SDHR can do already, or have SDHR handle those matters, or the EEOC, and I was listening to the testimony of the City Commission this morning as well, have them do it. They've got a lot of those tools there right away. How you ultimately deal with a public officer who has violated the law, in a less in a restorative way to the victim, that's kind of a JCOPE specialty in terms of dealing with it the way the law is written. One could,
Right, but how do we make the law, so the way the law is written is not working. So how do we make the law better so that we can make sure that you have everything that you need, and then the people who are being referred to you are also taken care of, and that there's a clean and clear process so that you don't have things dragging on for 18 months or 2 years or whatever it may be. And I mean, primarily that you have the staff and the support resources that you need. That's what I'm really asking. What can we do as a legislative body to help that?
I think if JCOPE is going to be the repository for that, to hire victim specialists. I spent years in a DA's office too, working with, and we had a specialist who dealt with victims, dealing with looking at matters that may not otherwise be covered by the public officers law. If that were to be amended so that we could have jurisdiction, we would need the resources. We have been held flat for about 3 years now, 4 years.
What do you mean by budget?
Yes. So our
Can you
resources.
talk a little bit about that?
I'm sorry?
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Our current appropriation that we're seeking is about 5.58 million. I think it's been flat for the 3 years that I've been doing budgets. We have had, in an effort to deal with more complicated cases, not just lobbying. We're talking about cases that become more involved under the public officers law generally. We've had to actually enter the 21st century and buy software that enables us to analyze documents, paper cases. That comes out of our budget. Obviously, personal service as well for our increasing for our staff. So, if there are going to be more cases coming to us.
It makes sense.
As
to
well
have
as
a
our
higher
lobbying
budget.
obligations too, which are have increased.
Understood. So this budget piece is actually tied to one of my last questions, and then I'll hand it over to my colleagues. But I think in last year's budget, so 2018 budget, there was a proposal to set up a separate unit to investigate sexual harassment. Has that been done?
I mean, there was a proposal to do that. Right, that was never that was not enacted.
So nothing came of it?
It was never passed, and if something like that had been enacted, we follow the law, we would set it up with whatever resources we had. We'd find a way of doing it.
So do you think that the reason it wasn't is because of the monetary component to it?
never had any real conversations with either of the houses or the executive on the monetary amount associated with it, in all honesty. It was floated, I believe, by the executive, and where it went in the budget process, we are not involved in that process.
Okay. Okay. For now, I will stop. Thank you very much.